It's great to be able to introduce Simon, and it's been really nice that he's put together this presentation from the large contingent from Primary Innovation that had the opportunity to go to the IFSA conference over in the UK and to share some of the lessons and insights that they gained from attending that conference for those of us who weren't lucky enough to attend. So I'll hand it over to Simon now to run us through. Thanks. Thanks, Simon.
Hello, and thanks for tuning in. Thanks, James, for the introduction, and thanks, John, for that. So today I'm going to be presenting some findings from the IFSA session that Primary Innovation people convened, particularly Niels and Denise. So this was IFSA session 1.3, and that's Penny, Kelly and myself at the top, in the top picture there, and a picture of the English countryside, which we were located in. So today I'm going to run through the 8 papers that were presented in our sessions. So it ran over 2 sessions, and then have some questions. Then we're going to, well, I've kind of condensed the findings across the 8 presentations to present them today, and have found 3 key ones. So the facilitation, importance of facilitation, the time and cost restrictions of a co-innovation approach, and the importance of collaboration as well. I'm then going to run through where the papers are available at the moment, and we're going to have some more questions at the end. So what happened at IFSA, for those of you who weren't there? This picture is a diagram from the first session of IFSA, which was called a World Cafe, where we got together in groups of 4 to 5 and kind of discussed 2 main questions. One was, what significant social and technological changes have been seen in European farming in the last 10 years? And then another question about the future in terms of the next 10 years. So that was quite an interesting start to the conference, very European focused, due to the nature of, I guess, it being the European version of IFSA. So, but there was also quite a few Australian and New Zealand representatives there as well. A bit of context as well, this was just after the Brexit kind of was still being processed by a lot of the academics and people that were there. So the delegates were kind of relatively gloomy, although in spite of that, the farmers that we saw, so we went out on some field trips. This guy's Peter. He was quite happy about it all. He said he's never taken subsidies in his life, and was quite happy with the UK leaving the EU. So that was quite interesting. So his farm, he was raising dairy heifers there, and also conducting agroforestry. So he had alleys of trees, which he informed us were seemed to work really well in terms of land use and maintaining biodiversity, and also supplemented the feed from the pasture. So his cows, he had photos of his cows eating the branches from the trees. So I'll get into the papers now. So we had 8 papers. The first one I'm going to talk about was from Uruguay. I'm going to run through them quite quickly. So if you've got any questions at the end, let me know, but due to time, I'll try and keep it brief. The first one was from Uruguay, was on pastoral farming and sustainability. And they found that they had a very positive experience with co-innovation, particularly at the farm level. They found that interaction was really important, and that sustainability was easier to encourage when they interacted with farmers, resulting in kind of real positive changes on the ground. I presented a paper on behalf of a number of authors about reflexive monitoring in New Zealand. So that was kind of presenting some of the challenges and lessons to successful co-innovation, particularly from the RM perspective. We had an interesting presentation from Cheryl Van Dijk, along with other authors, who is leading a project called HENNOVATION in the EU. So that involved 5 different EU countries, and they're all aiming to increase animal welfare standards in the egg-laying sector. So they've kind of flipped the traditional tech transfer approach to involve stakeholders right at the start to develop their plan. And they've learned a number of lessons around needing to be flexible and quite humble in their approach, and that their attitude has been integral to their success. And they also found a number of challenges that we'll discuss later on in the second section of this presentation. MS was there as well, and MS presented on irrigation efficiency in New Zealand. Just in case to Justified, we've all heard quite a bit about MS's work. He's done webinars before, so I'll skip over that one. We had a presentation from Canada as well. So Stefan presented on Canadian watershed management, and he, in his paper, included this quite interesting graph where he measures the gain from certain projects in regard to the effort was required to put in due to co-innovation or involving people in the project. So that was, I found that one quite interesting. We had a paper from Jeff and others on 9 principles in the New Zealand context and creating a space for co-innovation with the 9 principles. And this was a really good paper in terms of kind of framing the rest of the papers that we had in the session, because it looked at the kind of bigger picture around the 9 principles that we needed to encourage create the space for co-innovation to occur. And so it kind of reinforced the other presentations that we had. We also had a presentation from Jessica, along with her other authors, which was a result of the February Write Shop that we had, where we looked at 5 innovation projects and compared them. She particularly used participation and co-innovation at the start, and then had a look at that again in February to see where those projects were at. And the final paper was James and others, that was presented by Kelly, and that was on the Community for Change to improve systemic innovation in New Zealand. Took a system-level view of actions to increase innovation with change agents and trickle-down effects, and kind of trying, I guess the problem's trying to address systemic barriers. So that leads me to the first, the only poll question, which is, which of these statements resonate with you most considering your involvement in primary innovation? So John, did we...
Yep, so it's now showing on the attendee screens, and you can actually select a 1 or more.
Oh, great.
Unlike most of the polls, yeah, so we'll just see which is the winner. So there we go. So folks, I can see some people getting into the voting. That's good. That's great, and I'll close it off shortly. 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'll close it and then I'll share those responses with everyone. There we go. So it would seem as though Had Positive Innovation Project results is the clear winner with 75% and 25% shared across the other 3. So does that surprise you, Simon, or is that kind of what you may have been expecting?
Well, considering some of the challenges we talked about in the sessions, it does surprise me a little bit. I mean, I understand that there's definitely, it seems to be positive innovation project results, but yeah, I'm quite interested to also hear if there's any questions following on from the first half.
Great. So this is where we're pausing. So so as other people are typing in, the first question is, that lovely bit of artwork about, was it the World Cafe? Was that done live as the presentations were going on, or was it kind of just done quietly one night and then unveiled the next day? How did they do that?
That's a great question. So what happened was, as the World Cafe was going on and people were kind of rotating around the room, they had a graphic designer in the room as well, and after the kind of 4 or 5 people that were in a group had a chance to discuss what they thought the answers to the questions were, a microphone was passed around, and each of the groups got up and said their bits, and as they were saying what they thought the answers to the questions were, the graphic designer was trying to draft them onto this piece of paper. So it was a kind of interactive process, and I think she probably finished it off that night, and then the next day it was displayed in the foyer of the facility that we had the conference in.
Wow, that's great. And so I guess now it might be decorating someone's office wall somewhere.
Yes. I'm assuming it's gone somewhere.
That's good. Okay, so the next question is, did participants talk about their successes using co-innovation, and can you give a few examples perhaps?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the big successes, I think for mine, or probably the most interesting to us as a primary innovation group, were from the 3 papers that were from different areas. So particularly, I'll get into it in a bit more detail in the next half of the presentation, but Cheryl's work with HENNOVATION in the EU, she said they've come across a number of kind of findings that have made their work easier by including kind of the actual people on the ground in the process to design their project. Another example would be Maria's work, the Uruguay example, where by including the kind of farmers on the ground, they're building relationships from the start and feeding back, I guess, their queries and concerns, addressing them kind of straight away, and then being able to have kind of significant benefits in terms of sustainability indicators as a result of dealing with those concerns straight away and helping that speed up the change in practice on the ground in Uruguay there. So that's 2 examples I can give.
Okay, that's good. Simon, we're doing well for time, so I'm just going to launch one quick poll, and that's asking people how many others are joining you viewing this webinar at your computer, because I know sometimes we have sometimes half a dozen in a room. So folks, if you can just quickly respond to that, then it'll just help us track how many are really with us today. That'll be great. That's it. So just click the radio button that's appropriate, and I can see most people have now voted, so I'll close it off in 3, 2, 1. And out of curiosity, I'll share the results. Yeah, so look, most people are independent today, but there is one area where there's 3. And if there's more than that, just tell me in the box. That'd be great. Good. Thanks for that. So Simon, back to you to continue with the second half of your presentation.
No worries. Thanks for that. So are we back on? Can you see my screen again now?
Sure can. Saying question.
Wonderful. So we've been through that. The second half of this presentation is the kind of key findings that came across as a result of the 8 papers, and this is the kind of thing that I jotted down as we were having the concluding discussions, and then through back and forth between the people that were there, MS, Jessica, Penny and others, and came up with these 3 main ones, and they were facilitation being important, that there always seem to be time and cost issues, and that collaborative and open mindsets always help with these types of projects or approaches. So the first common theme, facilitation, it was found that in all cases where there was kind of successful examples or positive results as a result of the co-innovation project. There was some form of good facilitation, whether that be reflexive monitoring or external facilitation, social scientists being involved, consultants. In the European example, they got social science consultants in to train a number of the project staff in facilitation techniques, and then they took that back out to their respective projects. So in all cases, that was a common theme for having good co-innovation results. The attitude and flexibility of facilitators was seen to be important, so they needed to have an open-mindedness, adaptability. They needed to know boundaries, so when they could kind of step in and when was maybe right to hold back. They needed to be able to judge where to put in the effort to get the results. The third point there is dealing with different worldviews. So this again is probably mostly representative of the EU example, but could also come in our example when we consider the kind of Maori links. So they had to deal with different cultures and languages in particular in the EU example, being across a number of different European countries. And so that required another skill, particularly around the facilitation. And so appropriate awareness in that space for us moving forward is going to be important as well. The fourth one, sharing pork ribs, is important. So that's a Canadian example. I've got a photo there at the bottom. That's a Canadian example of basically informal social capital building. So Stefan found that the best results came from them having barbecues and sharing pork ribs, and as a result of that, they kind of had ideas that they may not have had before. People were able to relate to each other, build relationships that they could then take forward into the future, and he found that incredibly important. And then the final point on the previous slide was that the cause of most of the problems in terms of having this good facilitation or basis of good facilitation is the time and costs involved in doing that. So that was the second main point that came across all the presentations in our session. And so it was the time and resource required being questioned, and particularly around the tangibility of the time and resource put in. And so here we kind of, I thought, how might we make some causal relationships between the time put in and the outcomes that result. There's questions for me around how do we just have to write off the time and effort we put into relationships that don't work or that aren't getting where we want them to go, or is there a way of kind of recognizing that and moving around it? These were all things that were brought up. There was a particular issue around interaction to spark ideas, and I guess the hit and miss nature of different personalities bouncing off each other to spark new ideas, trying something new, and then maybe that leading to commercialization. So MS's example of water use efficiency, where they're trying to commercialize some of that, is a kind of, I think, a good example where that's worked quite well, but then there's also kind of examples where it may not have led to the outcomes, or there might have been barriers to getting to that point. There's also a question around how long should the relationship building progress take, and how long should that be resourced for, because it's a very, depends on the people and project and barriers and institutions involved. And when do you give up, considering the funding requirements or effort that's involved? So those were all questions raised again by a number of presentations. We also had issues around epistemological conflict, so questions of how we know what we know, particularly when traditional science and social science or facilitation come up against each other. So it's because instead of transferring technology directly, we're dealing with kind of social feedback loops. There was a kind of question around, well, what is science? What is this project that you're doing? It doesn't really fit with the traditional view of science solving a problem and then passing it on to the end user. So it was kind of, as explained in the EU example, science flipped back so that practice informed science from the beginning and not the other way around, which is a complete 180 from existing science, and kind of links to Akiko's work that she's doing at the moment on power relations in innovation projects. Also, yeah, relationship building is hit and miss, so the time and resource required can be justified in some instances, but maybe not in others. That leads to the final point, which is collaboration and the importance of those relationships and building of those relationships for a successful collaboration in the co-innovation approach. So that diagram down the bottom is kind of two heads coming together to come up with the best idea, and recognizing that the relationships are in fact key for the ownership of a project and the innovation. So then this comes back to the importance of facilitation, both formally and informally, and recognizes that success cannot be achieved in solitary confines. So there's time and energy and networks required that no one person or organisation can hold all the resources to, or be successful in a particular silo. Another question around collaboration is, when does the gain justify the effort, in reference to Stefan's diagram. So how do we make the ends justify the means? So this is something that at the moment we're trying to build on with the justification of the cost of co-innovation, to point out not just in economic terms but social and environmental terms as well, when the effort is worth the gain, when we make farmers more money, or we reduce the environmental impact, or build a network of scientists, and how we can measure that. So then I guess the final question I've got there is, it's always important to ask, why should others buy into co-innovation? Is it first important to let them know that it's going to be hard, time-consuming and expensive, and before we get into this process? And I guess then it's also worth thinking about the benefits of co-innovation, and the benefits being the process itself, the iterative nature of the process, which I would argue in a complex and uncertain world, where we have kind of dichotomies of globalization and localization, bottom up and top down, constantly financially challenged. This is probably something that can be most beneficial in terms of achieving the innovation that government bodies seem to expect. And I guess another benefit is there is no end point. The process evolves dependent on the people. So that's another positive aspect. So finally, where to find the papers? Online, all the papers are available at the moment. The Harper Adams IFSA website in the workshop section. So you can click on this link and you'll come to this web page where all the papers are listed. If you click on them, you can access each of the papers if you want to have a further read. And then I had some questions to the audience, or for people to think about in terms of where to from here in New Zealand. What types of future projects post-primary innovation should we be looking at? How does co-innovation fit in other projects? How does co-innovation sit in the entire AIS, or agricultural innovation system, and other innovation systems in New Zealand as well? And how do we value the social in science and innovation. So I think that's about it from me. So thanks for listening. I'd also like to thank Niels and Denise for organising the session at IFSA. They did a lot of work with that. And then there were also a number of reviewers that helped out with the papers. So thanks to them as well. Thank you to MS, Kelly, Jessica, Jeff, Penny and Rob, who were all there during IFSA as part of the kind of primary innovation cohort. And thanks to everyone else for listening and feedback. So is there any other questions or comments?
Great, there are indeed. So there's a comment here from Denise saying that she certainly agrees with the pork ribs principle, and that it's the best part of primary innovation has been the meals and the talks. So I think the take-home message there for James is to allow more money in the budget for the catering perhaps. And she also makes the comment that we need to try and capture the learnings from failed relationships to take into other parts of the projects or new projects, and maybe more facilitation is needed on this. So Simon, do you have any thoughts about that, about looking more carefully at the failed relationships?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and something that I guess at the conference we were trying to talk about ways of perhaps doing that, because it's quite easy to recognise when things are working well, when relationships are going well and outputs are happening. The other side of that, learning from when things aren't working too well, is a bit harder. So yeah, I would definitely be keen to see or develop some ways of figuring out how we can look at things like that and learn from those types of things. Yeah.
That's good. And Jeff has just piped in to say that that's been a great summary of the session, so thanking you, Simon. And that there needs to be a follow-up on the New Zealand PIP project. Have set up a base which needs to be built upon. So that's great. Thanks, Jeff. So Simon, we still have a few minutes to go. So can you tell us, was there anything else that was topical or surprising that came out of the IFSA conference for you?
Yeah, sure. So I guess a first point there would be it was quite a strange conference to attend, because we had when our session was running on the first day, there was about 14 other concurrent sessions, and so it made it quite hard to attend specific things, particularly when we were kind of locked away in our session for most of that first day. So the kind of timing of things wasn't great. I did attend a couple of sessions on European, the European political context at the moment, which was quite interesting to hear, particularly kind of rather raw debate about the implications of a British exit from the EU and what that meant or might mean for research organisations in the UK in terms of their funding and how they work. I found that quite interesting, and I'm sure more will come out with that as the process goes on.
That's good. And how do you think the other presenters manage the different stakeholder expectations about the co-innovation approach?
Yeah, that's another good question. I think that the HENNOVATION project, the one that was across, so that was across 5 European countries, the UK, Netherlands, Czech Republic, Spain and Sweden, they, by kind of training their project members in facilitation, seem to really be able to kind of, what sounded quite successful in terms of getting people, the input from the on-the-ground people back into the project and then changing it as a result. I think considering the challenges in terms of language and things like that that they were up against, they did a great job with that. And then similarly, in the Uruguayan example, their kind of keeping farmers in the loop from the start seemed to work really well. So I think having discussions with people on the ground that I guess are part of the research from the beginning in formulating the research is probably key. It seems to come across all the projects and is definitely something that's probably significantly important in terms of a co-innovation approach.
Thanks, Simon. So you mentioned Uruguay. So was there a thought at all that perhaps the co-innovation approach is more suited to developing countries?
That's a good question. A lot of what I've read seems to come from developing countries, so particularly around kind of co-innovation in the context of aid and development. A lot of the writings in that space in regard to world development. So perhaps it might, particularly if you think about kind of trying to include the agency of people that aren't as well off or not being as prescriptive or top down with that approach. I think it fits quite well. Whether more so than the developed context, I think I'm not too sure about.
Okay, great. Hey, thanks, Simon. So we'll now pass over to James to make a few concluding remarks for us.
No worries. Thanks for that.
Thank you very much, Simon, for putting that presentation together. It was great to see that summary of the papers presented at the session, and to see that what we're experiencing in New Zealand is also being experienced in other countries, and the way that that whole workshop session created an opportunity to learn from different experiences of co-innovation, not just in New Zealand but from other countries. And I really like the way that you've identified there the opportunities for the future of primary innovation and co-innovation in New Zealand around some sort of key questions that we can work on to help improve the practice of co-innovation in New Zealand and the opportunities for it. So plenty to keep us busy in the final few months of primary innovation. Thank you everybody for joining in as well, and thank you again to John for facilitating yet another great webinar. Thanks a lot.